Just want to share something today that I found really insightful, really helpful, really just interesting to kind of ponder on. And it's a line from a poem from a poet, William Blake. I think 1790 when I looked it up. Overall work was called Proverbs of Hell or something to that effect. 1790 were different times. Where I found it was actually a relatively non-historical source. So actually what happened was when I did a little stint last year, short kind of VR-like gig for Paul Allen's Holodome technology. I did it for Floatland, and they just put on a art curated exhibition this past weekend. And in it, one of the other pieces that they highlighted was something called Fool's Paradise by a modern artist named Paul Hertz. It was shown as part of the DiMoDA collection. Float ran the event called Sim Cinema at Weaver. Anyway, never mind how I found it. Lots of connections in there, but I'm grateful to them to help lead me to this line. This one line isolated from the poem that is, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. And I like it for kind of two different reasons, two different interpretations, either of which I have no idea if this is what William Blake meant in 1790. Part of his style, when I kind of try to look into it, is writing a lot of sort of extremes for sake of getting people to think about, questioning what he wrote and back and forth and so on. It's poetry, right? It's open to some interpretation. But so if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. The kind of two things that come to mind that I find both interesting thing about that I would not have realized if I had run into that line as part of this kind of Paul Hertz piece is that on the one hand, obviously, through sticking with the thing, through continuing to try to do it, through continuing to see through the mistakes, we gain wisdom that way. A lot, and this is something we find so much in game development. It's a huge part of why in Game Keto Club we encourage finishing every project we start, releasing every project that we set out to build. If you do a draft of a song, find some way to get that song in the game. If you start making some art, find a way to make that art in a shape you can put in the game. Because we learn through persisting, even if through something that was, in hindsight, a little bit of a folly, we gain wisdom through each time we release something, each time we finish something, do the full cycle. The wisdom is the accumulated knowledge of the mistakes I've made before and how to not make those again. It's being able to reflect on those. It's being able to draw upon what we learned along the process. And that for someone who will never persist through mistakes, one of the things that happens, right, is when we're beginners, everything we're doing is kind of going to be mistakes. We're beginners. And that the only way to get to expertise, to get to wisdom in any field, is to push through those mistakes until you make fewer than everybody else. Suddenly you're an expert. Right? I mean, it's a continuous gradient. It's not so much a binary. The other thing I like about it, though, and this is, again, I have no idea what his intention was so long ago. What is that, 230 years ago or something? But the other thing I like from this is to realize that how often, if we do something half-heartedly, if we do something and we give up on it, if we do something and we don't see it through, it was a folly. Because we didn't see it through, because we didn't stick to it, because we didn't continue on and push harder, even when at the time it seemed like it was a mistake. It was a mistake if we quit then. And this is something I think we've seen tons of examples of out in the game scene, of course, where a lot of my attention is. Lots of small business efforts, lots of people's creative efforts online, even if just this hobby, freeware kind of people just doing stuff, where if they stick to it long enough, if they keep doing it, if they decide to see it through, it becomes a smart thing to have done. It falls into fashion. It finds its audience. It, if nothing else, demonstrates by volume the seriousness and thoroughness of what's being engaged with, of the vision that's being seen through, in a way that any one of those things, I mean, heck, you take literally any object in the world. I don't even give you specific examples. You pick an object in the world, and you ask, well, what if they would have stopped doing that, making that thing, building that distribution pipeline, producing that thing from the manufacturing facility, whatever, completing that software? What if they had quit 75% through? And it would have been a dumb thing to do. It would have been a waste of the time, energy, and money invested into building that thing, not because the thing itself would have been a mistake, but because if they invest so much and then that's that and they quit, they never see it through, well, it was a folly. It was a bad investment because they made a bad investment. Now, I don't want this to lead to sunk cost thinking, to thinking that, I've already poured so much into it, I got to finish it out. This is where our technique that we use in Game Keto Club is always kind of like part of why we keep those deadlines fixed. So you can always kind of short pivot. You can always figure out, okay, what's the least work I can do left to put a bow on this and just put it out there and move forward with my life. But that persisting through it, that the mistake, what I like about this is this reframing of it's not like some things are good ideas, some things are bad ideas. What I like is this kind of way of seeing where a lot of the bad ideas are bad because they're good ideas that weren't seen through. And a lot of the good ideas are things that were bad ideas that we saw through. So, million exceptions to this stuff we come up with. We try to nitpick at it, but I find a useful frame, a useful way to think about things. And again, just go back to that source. It's William Blake, 1790. If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. I love it. Just want to share it today. Have a great day.